Hello, everyone. Welcome for another episode of Modern Business Operations. Today, I have the very pleasure to introduce Ron Glickman, Dr. Ron Glickman. Thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, Ron is the CIO of Trader Joe's, but also the author of a new book called Lead for a Change, and also adjunct professor at Cal State in Los Angeles. So many things I want to ask you about, everything, but maybe we start with the very basic uh, starting point. Tell me a little bit about your career, where you started, and some of the choices you made.
Oh my goodness, that could be a podcast all by itself. But to keep it simple, I have been in technology for my most of my career. I started out working for the Gap in retail operations. I went to school at night, studied business, and at the time, IBM was getting very famous for their mainframes. They created an IT curriculum at the business school I was going to. I took an aptitude test. I passed by 1 point, and I became an IT major. It's pretty simple. Uh, when I graduated, the Gap was not interested in hiring junior level technologists, so I needed to find a job where I could get great training. Went to work for electronic data systems, worked for Ross Perot, got my systems engineering credentials and education. And from there, went on to work in a variety of retail and supply chain businesses as an IT leader and professional. And I've done it on large scale transformations in the United States, from Asia Pacific, and for-profit and nonprofit companies. And I've learned a tremendous amount through those experiences. And that is what I teach in my leadership curriculum at Cal State LA, and what I've written about in my book, Lead for a Change.
That's incredible. Way to condense your, so much of uh, of a career in a short introduction. But yeah, maybe we'll start from the end. Let's talk about the book. The First of all, the book is out, right? Or
Yes,
is
sir.
coming out?
It's out. It's been out for about a year. Pretty well received. Won a couple of awards, and the comments on Amazon are generally quite positive. It is a practical guide with real meaningful sort of lessons and techniques that people can use at any stage in their career, whether they're in leadership or they're not. It really is just about being the most effective human you can be, and it's interesting and different in that way.
It's, in the podcast, I truly try as much as possible to get, as many practical advices and actual steps that people can take. So, already aligned out of the gate. But maybe if you don't mind, uh, first, like, what led you kind of write the book, but also like the synopsis of, Lead for a Change, the name. Always, to me, it starts with the name. How did you get to it? Because it's the hardest part to choose a name for anything. So you got to the name. Maybe a little bit of that context.
Let's start there. So I originally wanted to title the book "Happiness is Not the Goal," because when you're driving large change programs, I learned from experience that you cannot make everybody happy. So I led a big change program for duty-free shops after 9/11. Our sales dropped overnight 50%, and the leadership team got together and said, we have got to take half of our costs out in order to save this business. And it was a monumental task. And in driving that change, we did a lot of strategic things. We had data centers in 10 countries. We created 2 data centers. We had 7 million lines of code managed by people in individual business offices. We moved them offshore to a global delivery center. And in doing that, there was a lot of tumultuous change. And the people who left the company because we couldn't afford to keep them were very unhappy, obviously. The people who stayed were unhappy because they had more work to do with less services. The leadership group was happy on one hand because we saved the money, and unhappy on another because it was so difficult to operate in a much, much leaner environment. And so coming out of that experience, I realized that you really have to set clear expectations, whether people agree or disagree. They have to commit to the journey. And if you can meet or exceed your expectations, you will be successful as a change leader. And in the book, I write about all of the techniques and concepts that I've learned over the years. And my publisher said, you can't call it happiness is not the goal. It sounds like a psych book or a self-help book, and it's just not going to do what you want to do. So I was very frustrated by that feedback, but took it well. And, on a drive was thinking about what should the title be. And the reason I picked Lead for a Change is for two reasons. One, the book is about leading for change, and also about all of us who have had leaders throughout our career who, when we just wished they would lead for a change, because there's so many people who are in the role but just don't know how to get us together and help us realize our potential and achieve, kind of breakthrough results. So that's how we sort of came to the title, and it's worked reasonably well.
I love the double meaning. The adding a comma sometimes change the entire effect of it. But you know, I think that was definitely the first thing that came to my mind um when I saw, read the short description of the book, and kind of looked into it. And I didn't get a chance to read it, but I'm definitely planning to. Where um where does people get it wrong, really? If you need to kind of like, the first thing that people get wrong when they think about making a change, because I talk a lot about in this podcast, and a lot of uh great guests that, we end up talking about change happening to us whether we want it or not. And then do we take ownership of it, and sort of, lead, not to kind of reuse the name, but leading, the change, or is that change uh happening to us? And I always feel like people are coming to the idea of change from a wrong direction. I'm kind of really curious, how do you think about that?
I think it's really, really important when we're thinking about change, a couple of things. One, what is the purpose? What is the driver for the change? And, in a business context, it should be about customer centricity, improving your customer's experience, improving your products, improving your competition, expanding your market, something that can be measured and is aligned with the vision and purpose of the organization. Change for the sake of change is the kind of thing that you talk about where people feel like it's being done to them, but they don't understand how they fit, what their role is, how to measure success. And so the idea of, and in technology, this idea that people continuously talk about digital transformation, like, just the terminology makes no sense to many business owners who are not in tech. And so when techies are talking about we have to do a digital transformation and it's not connected to a broader business purpose or strategy, people get lost. Money gets wasted. There's tremendous frustration when that happens. And I think, that's the first thing people need to think about. Where are we going? And are the things we're doing going to be a means to the end, which is appropriate for a change program, or an end in itself? I'm just going to digitize everything without connecting to what my business is, because not every business requires the same degree of digitization, the same investments in certain areas. I believe there's a continuum of results that companies need to look at when they're creating change programs, and make sure that the projects are aligned with both performing and running the business on a day-to-day basis, as well as transforming, which is making strategic things happen to achieve some of the objectives that I talked about earlier. So I think vision and purpose is really key. The second thing is, do you have the skill sets within the organization to go where you want to go? if you set an objective that is inconsistent with your history and your people's experience and your belief system about how you manage folks, you could have a disconnect that makes it very difficult to achieve the goal, in which case you have to either reduce the objective to fit the people and processes that you have in place, or you need to invest in changing those people and processes to take you to a new place. Does that make sense?
No, that makes total sense. And I think this is kind of ties into one of the follow-up questions I had in mind as you were describing the first part. I think it's a good point, right? Change for the sake of change, or like, is this lemon worth the squeeze kind of thing.
Mhm.
I do believe that very fundamental to how everyone perceive change, right? If it's easy for them to see the outcome, and so okay, you change that, you're gonna get this outcome. If it's easy for them to see it, they're always more receptive to it. I definitely believe, though, to your second point, is, well, first of all, they might don't have the context or the relevant like background to even understand it. But what happens if what you're trying to do, and that's very relevant to tech enablement type of digital transformation, big, buzzwords, is a lot of time they're almost like an enablers to a future change that then would create the value or the impact. It's almost like, you are in, you want better education for your kids. You first need to move to a different, maybe, location. And so there's a lot of change that happens there just to later achieve a value of, being ready for education, right? And so sometimes, for the kids to explain that concept, that's too abstract, that's too far away, kind of thing. So, you know what I mean? Where, how do you lead, again, not using the same words again, but how do you lead people through to the idea that there's a better tomorrow thanks to this change, although the path there is few steps ahead and not even a couple steps ahead?
I think that it's a great question, but I think your metaphor is very interesting as well, having raised children and worried about education. One option is to move to a neighborhood where there are better schools. Another option is to engage in the community and try to make the local school better, or augment the educational capabilities for your children with enhanced tutoring, homeschooling. So the key thing about change dynamics, from my perspective, is there are a lot of options and implications for driving change. And often leaders sort of like to just think it all through, put one option on the table, and present that as if it's a black and white yes or no decision. And that's very frustrating for people who haven't been involved in the thought process and understood all of the options and implications so that they can weigh in and be involved in understanding and being part of the decisions to drive a change. I think the other side of sort of the strategic dynamic and the purpose are what it means to people and how it feels. And people who I think about people in terms of the skill that they have to do the job and the will that they have to learn in action and tolerate ambiguity and set direction versus follow direction. And if an individual has the skill to do the job and is comfortable learning in action and dealing with ambiguity, I'm going to call them a change agent. And that is a person who needs to be on the point, helping to drive the change because they thrive by learning in action. A second archetype, if you have the skill to do the job, but you're uncomfortable with change, oftentimes those people are ignored or rejected because they're not, quote, on board with the program. Really, I call them highly valued individuals. They have knowledge that is required to run the business. They have knowledge that is required to transform the business. They're just uncomfortable with uncertainty. And they need to be in roles where they're basically given direction, clear boundaries within which to work, and the support to be successful in their jobs. If people don't yet have the skills, but they're very willing to learn by doing, those are high potential individuals. They're new in their career, just out of college, transitioning from one kind of job to another. And they need mentoring and coaching and support to grow. And the worst archetype from my point of view, and I'm going to put that judgment out there, are people who don't have the skill or the will. I'm going to call them blocked learners. And they have to be given a choice to get with the program. Even if they disagree, they have to commit to the program, or we have to help them find someplace else to be, because those are the people who block change from happening. So I think regardless of how big the change is, how aligned it is with the purpose, we need to think about people. They need to think about themselves and understand their tolerance for ambiguity and get in the right seat on the bus. And you got to get certain people off the bus, and that is going to really position the organization to have a higher probability of success as they move through the change. And for individuals who feel uncomfortable, they need to recognize that discomfort as a signal that they have an opportunity to learn. And if they can see it positively and recognize that they can learn something and they learn, they will be less uncomfortable or more comfortable as they move through their journey. If people look at that discomfort as a signal to run or to hide or to feel shame, because that's kind of the nature of their upbringing or their career thus far, they're going to struggle with a change program and I think inhibit themselves for their personal growth, as well as inhibiting the organization from achieving the goals that they set.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, I know myself included, can immediately see, examples for each one of those archetypes that you described. Let me ask you a question. When you think about, so here's what went through my head. Definitely, even on quote unquote normal times, I don't know what that means anymore, but there's always changing strategies, changing environment, decisions of, sometimes as simple as there was a investment in a project that then is now there's a decision to not invest in anymore or change course or change priorities. As simple as changing priorities sometimes really take people off guard, and you can immediately see all those archetypes in a small team for a small change. Not to mention when in the last few years there was a lot of sort of large ecosystem changes, if you will, whether especially on the tech sector, but not only, obviously, before that with COVID everywhere in the world. There's a lot of change happening right now. If if you look at the different whether geopolitics, or just industry specific, again. But what is interesting to me when you think about those archetypes, I've felt many times in my career that I mislabeled people. I thought that they're a certain archetype before I made the change, and then post change on both sides, right? Where you think, oh, that person is going to be a change agent, and they end up being the last archetype. I forgot how you called
Blocked
it.
learner.
Yeah, the block learner. Like, and sometimes the opposite. You're like, man, I'm really worried about this team or this person, and then they end up being like very, So when is the right time? How do you kind of like effectively, again, not label, but sort of categorize the right people so you can bring them early to the conversation? Because
It's
if
a
you bring
great
too many
conversation.
people, by the way, because if you, just to finish that thought, because if you bring too many people, you're starting to really optimize for happiness, which I really like. I agree, by the way, with your book folks that said this is gonna sounds like self-help, but I also like the kind of the point you're trying to make, because that feels a lot of times you feel like the communication, the decision, are always trying to balance between what strategically you feel like is the reason you're doing this change, but also how for people not to be too mad for the change to be successful. Like simplifying it to like very basic terms because you want people to be on board. So happiness is a factor.
Well, I want people to be on board only if they want to be and they understand the dynamics that we're talking about. If they and I have a philosophy in my leadership culture that I tried to create where I want diverse perspectives. I want different points of view on any topic that we're debating. But once a decision is made, whether I make it or someone who works for me makes it or my boss makes it, I expect commitment, whether you agree or you don't. And it's a very positive dynamic to offer people the opportunity to disagree and commit because they've been heard and because they have a choice. And so I want you on board if you can disagree and commit. I do not want you on board if you're going to be a block learner because that, by definition, is going to slow down the whole program. And I think too often we try to make people happy and try to fit them into situations that don't make sense. It's really important with the archetypes to have the conversation with the person that you're trying to understand. And I explain the archetypes and say, where do you see yourself? Because to your
Interesting.
point, if somebody sees themselves as a change agent and I see them as highly valued, I have to explain, I can put you in that opportunity, but if you struggle with ambiguity and setting direction, which is expected in that role, it's going to be difficult for you. Are you prepared to take that on? Um, and and on the opposite side of things, I have put change agents in highly valued roles, and I've had them come to me and say, "I'm bored, man. This is killing me. And if you don't give me something more challenging that I can create and put my stamp of my signature on, I'm going to leave." And so it's not a one-sided, I make the decisions and put people in boxes. It is a conversation and an alignment of what opportunities are going to be best for the organization and the individual. And I think that that's a really important point around how to use these techniques. They're all about conversations and interpersonal dynamics. We have to understand ourselves and we have to understand how to work with others. And when those things come together, very, very powerful things happen with individuals and teams.
Oh, I like this very interesting to me that you actually ask the person in directly or indirectly to basically put themselves, like, how would you categorize yourself? I think that makes a lot of sense. It also create that accountability for it.
And a
Uh,
conversation is like, I don't see you there, and here's why. Let's have a dialogue because ultimately we have to, again, happiness is not the goal. We have to agree on what is the expectation. What are you going to be held accountable for? What kind of role are you going to be in? How are we going to help you learn the lessons that you need to learn or allow you to do your thing without having to worry, too much about learning? I think it's essential and it doesn't happen enough in my experience in business, whether they're for profit or nonprofit.
it's not easy, right? So I think this is probably why. I think at the end of the day, too many often I saw, situation where getting uh getting people on board that you already know that will be on board is easy. Getting people that you're not sure if they're gonna be on board or not, uh, it's it takes work, but it's relatively doable.
Well,
Getting
I just want that's a really important point that you're making. And I think how we define what on board means is really important. And so I think about trust and agreement. And they're two different things. I have worked for people who only trusted me when I agreed with them. And that is
yeah,
a very, very limiting sort of dynamic within which to work. And so um, I people can if you're only on board if you are agreed and think the same way and are aligned with the leader, that is a very that is a recipe for not really exploring the diverse possibilities in front of us and how we're going to drive that change. There has to be trust to go fast. And when you have trust and you have agreement, everybody is aligned and quote on board. But when you have trust and disagreement, then you're problem solving and you're compromising and you're going to disagree and commit. That is also, in my view, a definition of on board. It's only not on board if there's a lack of trust. And it's up to the leader to sort of foster that trust by being consistent and delivering on their promises and commitments. But I think how people define on board is really, really important. If you just want me to be like you, then, we're all going to be like the minions,
No, exactly. And part of it too is, when I think about also like what quote unquote easy and hard is, the real struggle with change is when it's not obvious. It's kind of like my original point of you can see the outcome immediately versus this is more like it feels to certain people like a bet or like like I don't understand. Like someone would say, quoting someone thinking, maybe they're 2 or 3 levels down from where the decision was made, and they might not have, maybe have like 5% or 10% of the full picture. And now the question is, how do you disagree and commit, or not even disagree? Some people don't even have an opinion about it. It's just not obvious that this is definitely the right move, and therefore there's immediately resistance because that obviously probably more than anyone, the biggest problem with change is people would always prefer to not do anything, like whether it's good or bad. Just normally people always feel more comfortable in wherever they're at in the situation, even if that situation is dire compared to other potential. Not
I,
everyone all the time, but
yeah.
I think normal distribution kind of thing. The majority always are like, wait, but this is what we know, type of thing.
Yeah, but that's why I'm trying to disaggregate the group and think about individuals, because I think change agents are always up for change. They thrive on it, and it doesn't really matter what the change is. They want to learn new things and make things happen, and that's what gets them excited and expands their abilities and their potential. Highly valued people are the people who doesn't really matter what the change is. They just want to be comfortable and stay in their place. And I'm not judging one versus the other. I'm saying we have to understand who is where, and to your point earlier, make sure that they're aligned in the right positions so that they can, be successful and thrive. I think that that's the most important thing when getting people, ready to go on a journey. I think the second thing is helping people understand that their discomfort is a signal that they can learn something new. And when you can embrace that as an opportunity to learn, it becomes a virtuous circle. If you make some mistakes and you can reflect on those mistakes and make meaning and learn lessons, you will expand your capability and realize your potential. If you can't, then, you sort of become a blocked learner and, find yourself stuck on the hamster wheel. And then it's up to the leadership team to help you find, a new place to be.
You have do you have definition of the size of a change that for some of those skills or methodologies, or do you believe every change is applicable, like every size of change? Like if a listener here is a C level or VP level, I think they immediately agree with everything we've been talking here and find a lot of reason in it. What about small, maybe a manager of a small team, or even individually for a person when they think about their own, like something that they're trying to make a change in their life?
It's a great question. So I think there's a continuum of change, and this I kind of gleaned from some Gartner research from many, many years ago. And on the continuum, there are, small marginal changes, and they are typically relatively straightforward and easy to do. They will have a high degree of certainty for success and a relatively low degree of value that gets delivered, right? And that just requires new ways of doing things. The next level is sort of growth-minded change, where we have to do things differently, and the value is a little bit higher, the certainty is a little bit lower, and on the extreme other side are what I would call breakthroughs, and that's when people think what you want to do is impossible. So that means the value, if you're successful, is going to be significant, but the certainty of that change is much lower. And so if you think about revenue, you're selling $1 million a year, you want to do 1,100,000. That's on the relatively marginal kind of change. You can figure out how to do that by working harder. You want to do 1,500,000, you're going to need some different ways, maybe some different markets. You want to do 5 million, that requires transformational change and a whole new set of know-how. It's not impossible, but it's outside the box of your experience. And I think it depends on the organization. So for some organizations, a breakthrough is marginal. So I think about a company that is not tech savvy, who wants to get into e-business and sell their products online. If they've never done it before, it's going to be transformational and a breakthrough and high return, low expectation that they could be successful. For Amazon, that's nothing. That is what their business is built to do. So I think for every change, it depends on your history, your experience, and the skill sets. And one person's breakthrough is another person's marginal change without any effort at all. And I think people, whether they're working in large companies or small, big teams or little, need to think about that continuum and build the capabilities to achieve whatever the results are that they're looking for. And typically a company is going to have a portfolio of projects that span the continuum. You can't do everything transformational because you put your business at risk. If you do everything marginal, you're not going to really stay in business very long and continue to compete at a high level.
Yeah, and I find it super interesting too that I love that continuum, and I think it's also made me realize that I don't uh I don't think it's always as obvious for everyone in the organization of what that change is in that spectrum. Because again, I keep going back to the fact that the context that people comes to the table with is different. And it doesn't matter, like, of course, communication is key, right? And you can communicate a lot more and you can bring that along. And like you said earlier, trust is very key too, because the real thing you want is people to be able to be open, have the trust to share their opinion, even if they're conflict with what the leader is, but also have the trust in the leader to basically say, I don't understand you or I disagree with you, but I'm still gonna commit. So I agree with all of that, of course. But when you kind of look at even in that spectrum, I think is a very, very practical tool to use that spectrum to even trying to understand, okay, how do you see the change that you're about to make? Do you see it as this mild change or the breakthrough change? But also, how will this team perceive it? Because even within, and I had the experience of running larger teams, but also running a company has me, interacting and leading different parts of the company, that some of them are a lot more in the Amazon example you gave for some changes, but for them it's like, of course we can do this, and it's worth the investment. The outcome is obvious if it's successful. The downside is very minor. While other departments, and sometimes it's flipped, right? Depends on the change. But other departments are like, what? No, that's gonna create so much confusion. That is, such a big thing. And balancing that too is interesting. So yeah, that, kind of my experience with it, but I completely agree.
Well, I would add one more thing that sometimes is helpful. I think leaders need to explain, the reasons for their change and help people try to understand. And I like to think about three lenses that people look through. The first is rational, right? Fact-based, whether it's a good idea or not. And many people, especially in tech, think only rationally. But there are also political lenses, and things happen for political reasons that may not seem rational at the moment, but there is a bigger strategy at play. And the third lens is emotional. Sometimes leaders make emotional decisions that don't make sense and they're not rational, but at least understanding that it's an emotional decision or a political decision helps the people who always think with their left brain understand that they can disagree and commit, and they're not insane because it doesn't seem to make sense in black and white on a spreadsheet. But that doesn't mean there's not a broader, more qualitative driver for a particular decision. And so I think thinking about which lens the leader is looking through is helpful for the people who are going to be the participants to try to just understand where that person is coming from. It's not always rational.
Great tool. I think all of those combined, I think very practical. I think if anyone listening to this and is not, running to get your book Lead for a Change, they might have not have been listening, right? I think there's a really great practical advice here, and I think anyone that is going after big changes or just becoming a better leader at that, I think it's all great stuff. So thank you again for all those insights and tips. I like to always ask, what is maybe some of the tips or advice that you've received earlier in your career and you think worth paying forward?
Great question. The thing that comes to my mind first, I got from the worst leader that I ever worked for, but he asked me it because I was working for a guy who bought 50 companies in 69 countries, and he wanted to create one enterprise IT organization for the globe. That was my charter. And about 3 years into the journey, he retired and replaced himself with a CEO who brought in his entire team, including my replacement as the CIO. And I was pretty frustrated about that. And the new boss called me in his office one day and he said, "Listen, I got to ask you a question. What is more important to you, to be right or effective?" And it really hit me in the moment that what he was telling me is, I don't care whether you agree or disagree, whether you have a different point of view. You got to go help this guy be successful. You got to be effective and go do that. And that was a profound lesson for me because especially in tech, we all have religious arguments about, Apple and Microsoft and Oracle and SQL and, all stuff that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. There are multiple options to achieve a strategic change initiative. And we need to think about being effective, working with the team, with a leadership group, whether we agree or disagree, to try to achieve that objective and to learn from the experience. And I think, I would leave you with that as something to sort of ponder, because at the end of the day, that became one of the most profound lessons that I've ever learned. It was a difficult circumstance. I did get fired, but I did last a little longer than I would have otherwise. So it was a very, very important thing to learn.
That's brilliant. I love it. If people want to, nerd out on this some more or ask you questions, are you on LinkedIn or X, or where's the best place to find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, but I got to tell you, it's a spam platform. It's very,
Yeah.
very difficult. And I don't do social media and sort of promote myself. My email address is ronald.glickman@gmail.com. Drop me a note and we can start a conversation either in person or via Zoom or on the phone. You can find the book on Amazon or wherever books are sold. You can get an audio copy, and I'd love to hear from people. I'd like to hear what you're trying to do, how I might be able to help you, what's working, what's not. And so I'm wide open for a conversation, but it's got to be a little old school, not
That's
with a
fair.
megaphone.
That's why I'm asking. That's perfect.
Thank
Ron,
you.
thank you so much for this conversation. I think it was great, and I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.